This is Rabea, and I have Ryan Fattini. We're going to be talking about digital transformation in the enterprise and what's the definition, the effects, and why do you need to take such a journey in your company. How you doing, Mr. Ryan?
How are you, Mr. Rabea?
All good.
Good to see you. Going to the point you just made, digital transformation. You just mentioned, how important it is, and what is the definition of digital transformation? I remember when I joined the team with you, we were at the tail end of what was a significant digital transformation for the company that you led, and the impact was already clearly visible. So take us back to why digital transformation, what is digital transformation, and go into a little bit about your leadership there.
Most companies they go into their own technology journeys. Some move faster than others, and that's understandable. Depends on the sector that you're working on, and your team structure, and of course the skills of the team that you have in your department. But digital transformation in general is the idea of leveraging technology so you are able in the future to keep enabling the business to move in the direction that they want to move or have the flexibility and agility to switch directions. Because technology is one of the main pillars of any company right now, even if you're non-tech. It's uh, it's actually a red flag if there is any company that thinks of it otherwise. So it's very important that you have the right team and the right stack in place that can take it to the next level, whether like from customer facing applications or systems, your scalability, being able to actually, again, switch direction depending on where the business wants to go. So it plays a big role, and it's a journey. It differs in the distance that you're going to cover and the speed that you're going to cover depending on how big of a transformation you want to make inside your enterprise. So that would be my little definition, my simplified definition of what digital transformation is.
So when you said the digital transformation is critical for enterprises, that's pretty well understood. That's not anything that anybody would disagree with. But you do see a lot of in the media. You see a lot of articles, tech journalists. I saw one in the Wall Street Journal in the CIO section where some companies are unhappy with their digital transformations, or the digital transformations didn't deliver what they expected it to deliver. So we know that the digital transformation that you led absolutely did deliver what was expected, if not exceeded expectations. I remember the meeting where
Yeah.
the CEO of the company stood up and said the growth over the past few years would not have been possible without that digital transformation. So that is one of the best testimonials you can get for a successful digital transformation. But a lot of companies are not successful with their digital transformations, or they stall, or they don't deliver completely what the expectations originally were. So what made this successful?
I think it falls, enterprises fall into two categories. One, that they look at digital transformation as an effort, as a journey, and it's multiple steps that you have to take to and small successes till you get to finish it, which is most probably it never finishes, but you cut a lot of the distance that you need in that journey. But there is also other companies that they look at it as big project and they need to, in other words, boil the ocean, and that's the challenge. Now, to repeat the part about the small successes, the idea is keep trying to break down the effort that you're trying to tackle into very small pieces where it's digestible not only for your team or your tech team, but also for the business to relate to it. In other words, if I have a business strategy in place that tells me that I need my customer satisfaction to increase by 5%, part of my digital transformation has to correlate to this goal. I can't be like running with my own effort while not relating it or connecting it back to what the business or the direction of the business that they want to take. So part of the success of that strategy or that digital transformation is it correlated 100% with what the or where the business wanted it to take. They wanted customer experience to be improved. They wanted less friction from the finance part of it, the payment part of it. So it was less friction, better customer experience, and less time being consumed on what's not important for the customer, which is part of the customer experience also. But because we correlated it really well, this digital transformation effort had the biggest impact because it was really visible from the beginning that we are working on the right things. The only one thing that I would add to that is I think businesses or enterprises sometimes they they get excited and they try to bite a big chunk of their transformation effort, and I think most of the times it comes with a lot of regrets and a lot of pain, not only from technology perspective but from people perspective also, because it's part change management also. It's not only technology.
So in this case, many businesses, I don't want to use the word fail, but many businesses are maybe less successful than they intended to be with their digital transformations. And what you're saying is one of the reasons that might happen is because the business objectives aren't clear and the digital transformation isn't moving precisely to the business objective. So they might be doing something where, okay, we need to do something modern. We need to re-modernize our tech, but there's no real direction to take the tech. They're modernizing for the sake of modernizing. And in your case, there was a specific business objective, and the definition of success was very clear.
Yeah, I saw both sides, believe it or not. So there's examples where the business didn't know what direction that they are taking, so transformation was stalling just because I want to correlate it to a certain business strategy. I want to know the direction so I can actually make technology be always ahead for the business, but I can't because I don't know the direction. And I saw the opposite side where there is actually a really good business direction, but the size of the digital transformation effort just gets bigger and that scope gets bigger because change management, because there's a lot of people involved. So you need to be able also to coordinate between all these people and all these departments on what direction to take that can correlate with the business.
So
So
let's
it
talk about
differs.
that. Let's talk about the directions or the different
Hmm.
parties involved. So there's business parties involved, multiple business parties involved, and multiple technical parties involved.
Yeah.
So in your case, you had multiple businesses had stake in this digital transformation, and on the technical side, this was a highly custom solution that had multiple tech components, multiple different cross-functional teams inside and outside of the enterprise. So how was managing such a large effort with so much cross-functional technology and so many different business components having a stake in the outcome? How difficult was it to manage all of these things?
It was very challenging because, as you mentioned, you need to find for everybody that is involved or head of department an angle where this digital transformation can give them an advantage for the department or the type of work that they do. So sometimes it's about having the right people or allies, I believe, to push your digital transformation effort in the right direction and still be able to have also other people pitching the idea of how it would give an advantage to the enterprise, even if not every person is taking a big benefit from it. It's like, how do you break it down and start having the right people in a room to agree on what will be the next step that could benefit the enterprise, and with the promise that each department, each um, leader will see the benefit from it.
So during this transformation, there was a lot of highs and lows, a lot of difficulty, not an easy task to do. Talk about some of the lows. Talk about some of the times when it just seemed to be overwhelmingly difficult, or maybe a lot of roadblocks that were showing up either from the business side or from the technical problems. And how do you push through that? How do you, because this might be what makes or breaks an initiative. It might be really when you get to those points that things just start to stop. Things just start to get overwhelmingly difficult. You end up sort of in a rut. Could be technically, could be with the business, could be both. The success is probably how you push through that grit. Talk about some of those times, or any times you've experienced the low points in the project where you really had to dig in to push this thing.
Uh, there's a lot of them, but for the examples I always give, especially like working with a team, is that once we hit such a showstoppers or big blockers, whether it's like from the business that they see the direction has to change, this is not like the highest priority, is to actually have the flexibility in your digital transformation effort. So you're not totally stopping the work on it. So in other words, you need to be strategic and be a really good orchestrator and having a team where digital transformation still needs to go while it's not priority number one anymore temporarily. And this is where I see a big issue that I know that businesses are not going to have the same priority all the time. But the biggest challenge I have with how businesses sometimes tackle digital transformation is that they think it's um, very easy to pause because it doesn't affect anything or it's not adding value yet. And this comes back to the idea like you need small steps, successful small steps that can show to the business the value, so you can actually be able to always sell it to the business as something that you can't stop. We need to keep going so you can see more of the benefits of it. So it's always that back and forth of like, how do you um, keep it sellable for the business that this is important and it has to continue because you're coming from the technology side. And as much as you can be the most or the best communicator to the business of why this is important, at some point the idea could stick. But again, business leaders are mostly heavily focused on prioritization for where the business wants to go. And sometimes digital transformation is not, as much as you align it, sometimes it won't be the priority. So how do you keep it going? These are the lows that you're asking about, which is it's not a priority anymore. We need to work on other stuff. So the biggest thing that I found, at least from morale and progress perspective, is that you translate your business's vision, correlate it to digital transformation effort, and always communicate to your team how that's correlated, how's that linked. So you keep the morale up, things keeps moving, and always have someone working on part of it. So it's
Perfect.
not.
So it sounds like the biggest killer of a digital transformation effort is a stop. Or in other words, okay, we've done one, two, three, four, five things, and now we're going to take a pause, and we'll get back to six at some point. This is the death knell for the digital transformation, is what you're saying. It sounds like what you're saying is always keep something moving. Never stop
It's
as long as it's correlating to the business objectives. As long as it hasn't drifted away from the business objectives, always keep something moving.
100% because if we look at it from the tech side also, it's challenging if you like pause an effort for like a year or two because it's not a priority anymore. What happens is that I have to confirm where this comes from, but from personal experience, tech, whatever system, whatever application that you build, it's going to survive for like 20, 30 years, no problems. But the thing is, between you having it always up to date, you always refactoring because there is complex pieces that needs to be simplified, technical debt, etc. So if you stop your digital transformation effort, any system, even if you think it works 100%, after 5 years or so, you need to rethink it. It could be the most stable. It could be like, but new tech comes up, there's much better ways to simplify things. So take, for example, like chatbots for customer care. You can have like a whole system that is built for a year to actually handle all your workflows, all your scenarios, your decisions. Suddenly you have large language models. Now this whole thing is just need to be, um, in other words, rebuilt because you have better tools, better tech. If you don't have this as a priority and you don't want to move forward with it, let's say in the next 5 years, there's going to be even newer tech, and now you're missing out on your team learning all these new technologies, new topics. So now it's a catch-up game even more to keep
Right.
this going as much as possible.
And that balance is difficult. So you're trying to balance all the new emerging technology with the existing systems, and then trying to determine what of the emerging technology should be integrated and what should not be integrated. So there's always that decision of how much to transform over time. And especially with the large language models and how quickly those are emerging, it's changing rapidly. So it's difficult now to determine how much of this should we integrate right now, how much of this should be part of our transformation, how all in are we?
I can even give you an example where it even has nothing to do with emerging technologies. It's just a matter of how you think about your systems. Whatever was differentiating you like 10 or 15 years ago, it could be commodity also, and it's better for your team not to focus on it. So your digital transformation could be a decision to introduce a system that does exactly what differentiated you 15 years ago, but now it's common knowledge, and I don't need my internal team to handle it. It's still part of digital transformation. Yes, it's not going to change the world, but it's going to give you your time back, which we know time is like the most precious thing we have, right?
So that's a great point. So that point is there was a differentiation in place. So there was something that was built at a time when there was no commodity software, and it differentiated, it gave an advantage to the enterprise, but then over the years it's become commoditized. And then the transformation isn't to find the differentiation. The transformation here is to find where those differentiations can be services. Or
Correct. To get my time back and my team's time back. That's the digital transformation in this case.
right. So there's two parts of the digital transformation. One is to find out what like previous differentiations can be commoditized, and then what current digital transformation could be a differentiator.
Yep. So it's there is a lot of angles to it, and every enterprise looks at it from the perspective that makes sense. I'm sure 100% that every business looks at the value and the benefit for the business. But again, that the differentiation one is very important to me as from tech perspective because I also need to always be the one looking at my team's time and how much maintenance I have, how much effort I'm putting into existing what we think are differentiation layers. So I can actually take this time and make it more valuable for the business, working on the right things, working on innovation, working on experimenting with new things, instead of me maintaining something that I can just replace it with a commodity software that is already existing. So, so you can notice that it's a lot of conversation, communication going back and forth. So
So that so
yeah,
trying to truly determine what in the existing system is a differentiator or not, and then what might be a differentiator going forward, and then that balance because they switch. So you're arguing that things that were differentiators in the future might no longer be, and things that are coming up, or there might be things that could be done now in the current systems that are differentiators, and determining which one is the true differentiator and worth the allocation of resources, and which one is actually creating more maintenance than needed because it is no longer considered a differentiation in the
and
system.
talk, and yes, exactly. So and that maintenance part brings up a good point, which is right now we know that enterprises are becoming more data driven. Not only because they haven't been like for the last 20, 30 years, but it's easier right now to to put into place the right metrics, the right insights, because we have systems in place that can serve that for us. So more enterprises are getting much, much more data driven. So the example for maintenance is a big one, because if you want to sell the business that this needs a transformation effort, we need to get rid of system X because it's giving us a lot of issues, or its rate of defects is very high and it's not solvable. I can't just put a team on it and just work for a year to fix it. It needs to be transformed to something different, whether it's like rewritten, refactored, or actually like replaced totally. That's where you need a lot of data in place to prove your point and actually help you pitch to the business, why do I need that? Yes, I understand it doesn't directly impact the business right now, but it will. And here is my data. So this is where like I know I wanted to bring up a question, which is how do you think from digital transformation perspective? We talked about all the systems that, and why do you choose that something needs some kind of effort to be transformed, I guess. How do you drive these decisions with data? Like how do I start if I'm like a 20, 25-year-old company trying to actually move forward with my transformation effort on the data side? How do you start? How do you start with that?
I think analyzing the subcomponents of the system. So we talked about this where to capture the current state through a full systems analysis, meaning the entire enterprise architecture down to the subcomponent layer, in which you're defining what each component is doing and what purpose it's serving within the system and for the business. And then you can establish a modernization rate or a score that'll tell you where within your network, which nodes of your system are the most high risk. And those high risks can then be determined based on the business criticality, which should be prioritized first. So if you have a really highly deprecated component, but it's very, very, very low critical to the business, it might not be a higher priority. And you might have parts that are highly deprecated, that are highly critical, and these should be looked at and evaluated first. And then, like you mentioned, maintenance and allocation, then you can determine what are your allocation rates of maintenance currently. How much engineering time is allocated to these components? And is that enough to take these high-risk components and put them into a low-risk category? And if it's the case that it's not enough, then you need to think about a digital transformation effort that's separate from your current modernization or current maintenance allocation rates that you're currently doing within your engineering department. So that full system analysis is important to model out those high-risk components, and if you're doing enough internally to take those from high risk to low risk. And if you're not, then you need to do a larger effort.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's a problem with multi angles where however you want to tackle it, it could be that it's you are facing problems already with your current systems, and it justifies that this is going to stop the business at some point. So I'm raising the flag that we need to do something about it. But on the other side, yes, I agree that it could be also coming from pains where the business is screaming that I can't move forward because you are stopping me as tech, your systems are stopping me. And this will also raise another flag saying digital transformation has to happen. Or the third, which is, as you mentioned, emerging technologies, where we are behind, we see the trend in front of us in the tech space, and this is the best move we have to do so we can actually enable the business to go to the next level. So there's could be like a lot of ways, could be a combination of those decisions that can take you into a digital transformation effort, in other words. But to me also, uh, now we're talking about like large language models and more AI is being exposed to the enterprises. Now they're learning more about it. How do you prepare yourself as an enterprise for this AI trend and what's happening right now? We're talking like from technology slash systems perspective. Why do I need to do as an enterprise to be able to get the benefit of this trend and at the same time evolve with it as much as it gets better, it gets faster, it gets cheaper?
Most companies aren't aren't prepared. Most companies weren't prepared when the generative AI hit with ChatGPT 3.5 in 2022, Q4, I believe, and massive hype like we haven't seen in quite some time, and a lot of panic in the executive teams to integrate these and adopt this, and a lot of uncertainty on what any of this meant and how disruptive it was going to be. And most companies simply weren't prepared. And by not prepared, there's a couple of things that they weren't prepared with. One was their data strategy. Most enterprises did not have the right data strategy in place. They didn't have enough investment in data strategy. So things like centralized data fabrics and unstructured data sources weren't there. So they had many disparate data sources, maybe no even data architecture, no real data architecture. So their data strategy wasn't prepared for the generative AI boom. And the second part is the engineering teams weren't prepared for the generative AI boom. So you had a lot of your classic engineering, your software engineering teams who are now being introduced to systems that are very different than the ones that they're currently generally used to maintaining. So you have classically deterministic software systems, which everybody understands, and now you're bringing in these probabilistic systems and introducing an entirely new layer of uncertainty into your enterprise, and most engineers aren't prepared to handle this. So you have the two fault lines. You have one, they lack the data strategy, and they're not positioned to really get the benefit from generative AI. And two, you don't have your engineers prepared for this new introduction of uncertainty into the systems. And those two things are why most of the AI strategies in the past year and a half have not really panned out to what the expectations of the executive team were. It's not because the generative AI models can't produce results and can't produce useful inferences. It's because the enterprises simply weren't prepared on both the data side and the engineering side.
And you look at it, is that it's going to be just extra work and time to actually massage and get data ready for like a certain AI solution, or do you think it's a bigger challenge than this if you don't have the data strategy right in place?
I think the data strategy is one of the biggest parts of it. So if you invested in your data strategy over the course of the past few years, when you should have been, if you were an enterprise and you were not investing in your data strategy, that was a miss, because there was no reason, even with classical machine learning systems and data science models, that you shouldn't have been using these things as differentiations and optimizing different parts of your enterprise. So that was a miss if you weren't investing in your data strategy. And when generative AI hits the world scene, and everybody can access these models through APIs, and then more and more of the open source models started coming out, and the engineers were not prepared for any of these things. Because it requires far more than just wrapping a little API over the LLM and producing some results to actually introduce these things into the enterprise in a useful way. It's far more complicated than that. That's just the beginning. Getting these things into production is one part. Getting them to maintain utility in production is an entirely different problem. So I believe those are the two biggest problems with the technical part of this, which is the data strategy and the engineering skill sets. And it's not that the software engineer's skill sets generally would have been prepared. There would have been no reason for them to be prepared. Like, that's why you had machine learning engineers. That's why the entire machine learning engineer discipline started, was to try to bridge the gap between the production level models and the data scientists that were building them. You needed these specific types of engineers that understood these particular types of applications, and then they could get them into the production systems. And then there's
That
other things.
efforts.
Like,
Sorry,
there's
go
of
ahead.
course direction and vision too. There's direction and vision of the enterprise, and somebody has to have a vision of what this means in an enterprise. So it's not just the engineering and the data strategy. Someone needs to be directing how they're seeing the generative AI into their enterprise architecture, how these assistants and agents are going to work. So that would be the third fault line: is data strategy is one, your engineering skill sets is two, and then is there a real vision around what this technology can do for your enterprise, no matter what space you're in, no matter which industry.
That makes sense. So in every transformation effort, you mentioned it, which is a key point, is that even if you want to start on that journey of looking at your current systems, see how they enable the business or how they are facing blockers that a transformation effort is needed. He talked about like looking at what you have current state. It's very important. It's very important to actually take an overall eagle view and see what is the on a heat map, what's the most red that I need to tackle right now that is going to stop my business, whether right now or in the near future. But from data perspective, I think I want to understand it more also, which is, let's say I'm an enterprise, I'm trying to build that um, data strategy to actually get the basics, get more advanced, and prepare myself where I'm ready for any kind of trend that is coming my way, just like more AI, more advanced large language models specifically. So how do I start? Like I have my data scattered in multiple databases everywhere. Where do I go from there?
I'll go back to the original the point you just previously had made is that the digital transformations are difficult. They've always been difficult. They're heavy lifts. The data strategy was always an extension of the digital transformation traditionally. It was we're digitally transforming our nuclear systems and our application layers, and then as an extension of that is going to be our data strategy. With large language models now, it's entirely different. Data is the system. It's not an extension of the system. It is the operating system now. So digital transformations now have to include and have to be thinking about how the agents and the multi-agent systems or the multi-agents are going to be part of the system. It's not going to be enough to say we're going to extend from our digital transformation our data. We'll drop that on top of whatever our core systems is. It is the system. So going back then to the data strategy, your fundamental data strategy is the centralizing of all of your data. So the disparate data sources. So at the foundation of your data strategy should be a centralized layer data fabric, data lakehouse, whichever particular technology you want to use. The important part is that you've centralized your data and your unstructured data. So you have one place that's standardizing all of your disparate data sources together to a single semantic layer that then all of the models can consume. That's your foundational component. And then without that, it's going to be really difficult to position yourself for maximum impact for their generative AI strategy. It's going to be a lot of data engineering and wrangling and potentially creating tech debt because you're rushing through the data strategy and not properly building out that foundation.
And I love this because that brings up it's not about you or your team working with AI, it's how much work you're going to put on top of it in addition to your team focusing on AI also. So as you said, like I'm going to start right now like I need to clean my data. I need to make sure everything is in place just so I can start working on proving that AI has value to my enterprise. So the data strategy is just essential.
If you go back 3 years, I'm old enough to remember 3 years ago. If you go back then, data was sort of a side thing. It's like we have our core technology, our core engineering, and then we have data also. And a lot of companies were starting to create their data teams, different degrees of success. Most of them probably not prepared, and most of them significantly behind in the generative AI race right now. The difference now, fast forwarding a few years, is that data is not the side thing. Data is the thing. So your engineering and your core systems, it's no longer going to be so demarcated or, oh, I have my software engineering over here and I have my data science guys over here. It's all going to be the same thing. It's going to converge on engineering that includes understanding all of these disciplines. It's not going to be acceptable in the future if you're an engineer in a technology capacity that you don't to some degree understand machine learning and data science. So that's all converging now to where data is the story and the AI is the story, and it becomes part of the fundamental operating systems. And now you have an entirely different ecosystem that includes a large layer of uncertainty that now you need the proper skill sets or the engineering teams to be able to handle to maximize the value from these foundation models. And that's going to be the biggest paradigm shift, is that it's no longer going to be acceptable to not understand machine learning. And this pivot from deterministic systems to the probabilistic systems and the layer of uncertainty, how companies are able to adapt quickly to that are going to determine how differentiated they are from their peers, and the ones that do it well are going to be far, far ahead, and that gap is just going to continue to grow between the companies that haven't made that pivot and the companies that have successfully pivoted.
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, because I think we are looking at it is that it's a sequential events that needs to happen in a certain order. But what I want to assure is that this is not the case. I truly believe that you can be in your digital transformation journey. You can be at the same time, as you mentioned, integrate, always putting in mind where your data strategy is going. And at the same time, you might have like a 60-year-old systems in place, but you still can experiment with AI and actually get the benefit out of it. It's just a matter of, if you have a perfect scenario, you would have up to date, very flexible, modular systems that can drive your business. You can have a data strategy that can take it to the next level. And yes, you have all the capacity and budget to experiment and innovate. But
That's
again,
right.
you don't need to do all these things sequentially. You can
It
actually
does not
be
have to be
doing in
sequential,
parallel.
and it should not be sequential. If you're one of the companies, which is the majority of companies, that are not positioned well with your data strategy, that may not have the engineering skill sets to truly understand the uncertainty of the systems and the way the models work and how to handle the models and the drifts. If you're one of those companies, which is most companies, you want to start exactly like you were saying, is you want to understand some use cases and you want to start some experiments in parallel to building out your data strategy. You can do both at the same time. You can start to formulate, what does my data strategy look like? How do I begin to centralize my data? And also, what use cases might this technology be good for? Where should I start my experiments and find something simple, something useful, some desired output from some of these foundational models in parallel to developing your data strategy. So you should start both of those, and they should be started in parallel. And then those roadmaps should be created, and then the investments should be put in place.
Yeah. So overall, it's as tech evolves more, enterprises are gonna like see that these trends are gonna pile up. That doesn't mean that you need to take action on every trend that shows up. But I think the bet is on how much time you can save for your team to actually always be ready for the next trend. And that's what digital transformation is about. That's where you need your data strategy in place. And that's why you need to be experimenting. So
Correct.
you,
And the
you
experimenting is how you're going to cross train your engineers. So the engineers, by experimenting, are going to understand how these systems work, the uncertainty of the systems, the probabilistic nature of the systems, understanding how to handle the different types of errors, understanding how to handle drift, understanding how to build out these types of evaluation systems. So your experimentation is going to, one, find useful cases for the business, and two, it's going to cross train your core engineering teams, at least up to the level where they understand what's happening.
Yeah, and that goes back also to the tech leaders, because again, your business is not going to be focused on like which trend you should be looking at from technology perspective. That's where tech leadership comes in to instill such mindset. I can have digital transformation ongoing, and it has to be always alive if you want the business to be always flexible and enabled to go to the next level and work on my data strategy, whether it's in place and improving and evolving, or that I still need to foundationally start working on it and experiment at the same time. So we can't blame it all on the business. You can't blame it all on your your engineers and your techies. I think one of the biggest weights are is going to be thrown at the tech leaders to drive all these ideas and initiatives, so you can always be ahead of the business.
Right. I agree. You don't want to blame anybody yet,
It's blameless.
for now.
Yeah.
But there's going to be companies that do this right, that do this well, and then there's going to be executives at companies that are not doing this well. And at some point, there will be some level of accountability if you're too far behind. There's
Yep.
a little bit of room right now because it's new and a lot of people are, don't fully understand, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and but that's now. But this is going to change. And it's
That is
going to
true.
change faster than I believe many are expected it to change. And you can see in the industry where the industry is pushing with the multi-agent orchestration systems like Agent Force and Crew AI and GPT has Swarm. You can see the industries understand where it's going. And they're building rapidly these orchestration systems, and they're trying to sell these types of integration products to help these engineering teams. And they are so far ahead of where most companies are in their engineering departments. Most engineering departments, most companies don't have a single use case in production that's doing anything useful for the business. And now you have these companies creating orchestration, multi-agent orchestration tools, so far ahead of where most enterprises are now. And this is where the differentiation between companies is going to be, and it might vary between industries, but this is where it may be okay now, but it's not going to be okay in the future.
And that brings up a point, by the way, which is how do we connect the digital transformation, and also I can put under it modernization with data and AI, because I think we split them to phases, but again we said like they can work in parallel. One third part that I want to talk about, which is how to put AI into consideration when talking about digital transformation. Because I think right now, whether it's a trend or not, I think it's becoming core to actually pause and think about AI when it comes to digital transformation. I'm not gonna go replace a system. I'm not gonna go improve user experience for multiple systems before seeing what AI can do for me in this area.
Right,
What do you think
right.
about this?
In the trend part, so that analogy, those that two by two, that would have been something that would have been more, well, it could be relevant now, but certainly relevant in 2023, maybe late 2022, or there was a lot of talk about, well, is this just smoke and mirrors? Right now, if you're in an enterprise, and you're, even if you're not in technology, if you still think this is just going to fade off into the sunset and there's no real value to the enterprise, you're probably not in the right position. So I think now the case is, okay, well, how much do we do and what do we do? And a lot of that has to do with where the current state of your data strategy is, where your modernization system, or how modernized your current systems are. If you have like very old, very deprecated systems, this is like your first priority. The difference is now, though, that if that's the case, the difference is it can't be an afterthought. It can't be, well, I need to modernize my nuclear systems, and then we'll think about how these AI agents and things integrate. It needs to be part of the original plan. It is the plan. So, and that's the difference. Where, say, if we go back to your digital transformation years ago, this technology didn't exist. The difference would have been, as you were leading that digital transformation, it wouldn't have been, well, let me get this done, and then we'll look at what we can do with generative AI. This would have been part of the original objective, and it would have been something that you would have been doing from the start. And that's potentially a mistake enterprises could be making, is they might be modernizing, they might be doing digital transformations, and they're thinking about the AI as an afterthought or as an extension of the system, where it needs to be considered part of the system. It is going to be the system.
Yeah, that's it is exactly I that part where as as you decide your architecture, as you decide what kind of customer experience you have for your digital transformation effort for a certain system or systems, and how automation works, how composable it is again. Yes, you have to consider like how AI can add value in this transformation effort.
Right.
100%
And
agree.
it'll start with, if you start with your simple use cases, they're going to be things that are probably saving time. So they might be things like knowledge bases, things that might be organizing documentation, summarizing some of the basics, the basic functions that generative AI models do really, really well. They're also very, very useful to the enterprise. And then as you develop your new architecture, you start analyzing your systems and determining where these types of agents might work within your systems. So the agents are going to be part of all of the components of all of the systems over time, not at once. You start with one, something that's useful, then you start with a second agent that's useful, and then maybe they communicate to one another, and then maybe you bring in a third, and then over time you build out your AI org structure that's operating within your system at every subcomponent level. And they're all communicating to one another in the same way that humans working in these systems are communicating to one another. And this is the way that AI becomes part of your operating system, becomes part of your AI org structure. And this is why it's different than traditionally where data science was looked at as an afterthought. Oh, well, we'll do our data science once we have this in place, and that's over here, and our data team is over here, and our machine learning happens over here. This is all going to be the same system. And the people working on these systems are going to have a lot of these intersecting skill sets. There's going to be machine learning is going to be on everybody's job description in the engineering department. Everyone's going to have to some degree understand machine learning and AI and the uncertainty and the probabilistic systems, and they're going to all have to understand how to maintain them and maintain the components that do the evaluations and the reflections and the feedback loops and all of these things. Yeah.
Brings up a good point that just like as we talk about digital transformation in the enterprise, there's been this question that gets brought up all the time, which is buy or build, right? And I think this is one of the questions that are being brought up right now, which is with AI, do you also buy or build? And I'm with what you just talked about, is that you can decide whatever commodity software that you're going to buy because it's not changing the life of your employees or changing the life of your customer experience. But once it comes to differentiation, I think AI is one of the ones, and I'm not talking about automating someone getting an email and summarizing it, but I'm talking about core functionalities that you want to differentiate yourself from any other business of how you implement it and how you present it to your customer. So I think one of the main things is like what I'm hoping for, even in any digital transformation effort, yes, to consider AI from the beginning, but never, if it's not commodity, never think of it as something that you can just buy and just stick it to any system.
It's probably going to be a combination. There'll be times where it makes sense to use some commodities,
Oh yeah,
but I
there's
wouldn't
certain
I wouldn't
tasks. Yeah,
I wouldn't bet put all your chips into a vendor for these multi-agent orchestration tools. You would want to build something into your core system that allows the agents to communicate and operate